As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're delighted to have a returning guest tonight. Bill Murphy, co-founder of GATA.org, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and also host of LeMetropoleCafe.com, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. Bill is a renowned lifelong vigilante for the truth and for fair trade and free markets in the precious metals industry, for encouraging regulators to do their job and crack down on unlawful manipulation of gold and silver prices. He's here with us again on Reluctant Preppers to give us the long view, his perspective from decades of watching out and watching over what's going on in these markets and helping to get people to be forecasters of what must come as natural law and reality reassert themselves eventually. Bill, thank you for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Great to be back, Don. Again, thanks for having me.
In some of our past visits, we've talked a bit about, what's happening in the next month, or what happened last month, or this week in precious metals. And I was actually hoping that we could take a step back and give you a chance to give us more of the perspective of your wisdom gained over the years that you've been so diligently investigating and researching and diagnosing what is going on and what's going wrong in the gold and silver markets and the regulation of them or lack thereof. And just thought if you could reflect with us on sort of what are the one or two top lessons learned or words of wisdom that you could share with us from your career of the work that you do, to really give some perspective, just to underscore that a lot of people who are here on Reluctant Preppers channel are not interested in following the flash in the pan crazes and running this way and that way. They really want to do what is prudent, what's responsible, and what's going to come out on the right, who's come out right in the long game. So if you could kind of reflect with us on your words of wisdom, we'd love to hear and discuss further what you have to say about that.
Sure. Well, Chris Powell is my colleague and co-founder. We've been at this 18 years and started off very simply, and I realized that as a former commodity trader, that the gold market was being suppressed and rigged by the bullion banks. And I started to complain about it all the time, and Chris said, why don't we do something about it? And long story short, we realized it was much bigger than we thought, that it involved the Fed, the Treasury, Exchange Stabilization Fund, the BIS, Bank for International Settlements, other central banks. And it's huge, and it's a big, big deal. And it's how big? Well, the price of gold, if it just had kept up with inflation, would be $3,300. It's $1,200. You look at what a Bitcoin, when I was in Acapulco at a conference, Jeff Burrick's conference, both gold and silver were the same price, and they were ecstatic because it got to $1,240. And just recently hit $4,000. And these are the kind of things that markets can do, as other markets have done, real estate in certain places, art, and so on. But gold and silver are totally controlled. And Chris and I and a lot of supporters that we're thankful for have been trying to expose it for nearly 2 decades now. And, we've gathered all sorts of proof and laid it all out. It's clear as can be. And what we've learned is, what I've learned anyway, I'll speak for myself, is that we have no free press in America. We don't have free markets, and that's gotten much worse since President Trump came in. And it's astounding to think, as I grew up as a young person, and we used to rant about the communists and their lack of freedoms in every area, and we're just as bad. And we're actually worse because we hide it. We don't recognize it's going on. And I know what I'm talking about here because, in terms of the press, because when John Embry and Spot Asset Management and Chris Powell and I were in London in 2010, Claudia Carpenter, the gold reporter, said that Bloomberg would not allow GATA to be mentioned. And then just recently, last week, there was an article, Friday, in the Wall Street Journal about the Fed and gold, and the reporter, Katie Byrne, called me, and I sent her 60 emails about all kinds of stuff related to our issues and so on. And And I was all excited about it, didn't mention anything, and she gets back to me with, oh, no, the editors got out. They left almost everybody else in, but they said the article was too long, so we got cut out. And John Embry told me up front, he said, they will never allow you to be mentioned in the Wall Street Journal. And sure enough, we weren't. And it's very, I can't say discouraging, because I wouldn't stop or change what I'm doing for anything, but we realize it's part of America, and it's really something to, I'm 71 years old now, to realize that this is not the country I thought it was, and there's so many great people in it, of course, but the system is in tough shape. And if we're correct, this rigging of the gold price, pardon me, again, speak for myself, is going to be the biggest financial scandal in U.S. history. If, in fact, when the gold and silver markets blow up and this gold cartel, as I call it, loses control, if there's especially hard economic times and gold and silver going nuts and nobody can understand it and people want answers. And that's the only way it's ever going to see the light of day.
Your comment about no free press echoes what we had Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute on our channel, and he said that if people understood the state of how controlled the media in the U.S. is, they would not believe that it is more controlled than the Kremlin-controlled media in Soviet Russia.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. Same thing. That's what I just mentioned. Yeah, he's right, and it's horrifying to learn this and realize just how bad it is. And he put it very well.
And the other aspect of that you reflected on is this is not the country that you're continually being. That is continually being revealed to you through your research and your hard digging and fact-finding is not the country that we were taught to believe in when we were growing up. And that's a question I have for you is, has it changed dramatically for the worse, or are we just able to find out more than we were in the past? And in fact, it was this way all along. And I think you had mentioned that you had done some longitudinal research going back into history, and what are you finding?
Well, there's people that talk about the Fed and what was created and what was going on behind the scenes, and there's some quotes from former presidents that I don't remember the specifics, but get into these issues of the banking monopoly and all this sort of thing. And it's just the first rule is it's not allowed to be discussed, and we stumbled into it, and that's what we've learned. And I think what's happening now, though, why it's going to be worse, is that gold is looked at as a barometer of U.S. financial market health. Paul Volcker said, former Fed chairman, up is bad, down is good. So they want to suppress the gold price for that reason, and that's the reason they have to do it the same thing to silver. And it's disguising, I think, a lot of the ills and what's going on in terms of debt and all sorts of the government issues and so on, that's disguising things, and they're boosting up the stock market with the plunge protection team and counterparty risk management group, which is a Wall Street, crew that, helps to rig the markets. And that's why the stock market doesn't correct. It just goes straight up. And it was my opinion the day after the election, and I've stuck to this every single time, that the money and power behind the scenes is so petrified of Donald Trump blowing things up that they had to change everything and go into high gear in terms of gold and the stock market. Because before he was elected, every time, if he had a chance he could win, and this is a fact, the stock market would go down and gold would go up. And that's what happened a few times, but nobody thought he could win. And then when he did, they realized and had to put another plan into action, that the stock market had to go bonkers to change perception. So like what is going on now, and all that, and I'm not against it personally, but just in terms of the markets, I have friends that are in top Republican, stature in different states. Are horrified, and they knew this was coming, except it's probably worse than they expected. And look where the stock market is; doesn't matter, and gold can't get out of its own way. Look at what Bitcoin did.
Yeah, on that point, would you talk to us about, again, reflecting on your years of wisdom about the difference between fiat money, sound money, and now cryptocurrency? What, from your decades of perspective, what words of wisdom would you give people who are coming into this for the first time?
Well, I'm not sure how much wisdom I have, and I thank you for the kind words, but I mean, I was at Jeff Berwick's conference in Acapulco, and it was a lot of crypto people there, and it was a gold conference and crypto conference and so on, and they were ecstatic because Bitcoin had reached 1240. And there were so many happy people around. It was the same price of gold. And I said, these people are happy. He said, I'm not happy at all. And here we are 7 months later, and Bitcoin goes to 4,000, and gold's a few dollars higher than it was back then. It's the difference of what happens when something is suppressed. That's how much gold is suppressed, because if you compare it to all other assets, the stock market, the cryptocurrencies, real estate in certain areas, art, it's awful. And it's been 6 years of awful. And it's really taken its toll on the industry and people involved in it. And I'm just hoping it's going to change soon.
We had Rob Kirby on just recently, and he actually made the comment, and it's an interesting one in this perspective, is he said that the U.S. dollar is actually hyperinflating against cryptocurrencies.
Well, Rob always has a different way of looking at things. He's a good man, and I always respect what he has to say. And I just think the dollar is in the deepest of trouble, and it's been downtrending. And that's another example of how rigged the gold price is, because the dollar has just really gotten beat up badly in the last 3 or 4 or 5 months, and gold hasn't done a thing. And they used to say, well, the dollar going down was gold friendly. Has not been the case, and they know just what they're doing. I mean, they're in there all the time. James McShirley, who was mentioned in that Wall Street Journal article, has pointed out for years and years how gold goes up. A lot of times it's always capped at exactly 1%. And, they just put their algorithm or whatever they use in motion, and that's it. And, of course, silver is compared to other assets, it's almost mind-boggling. I'm somebody who's looking for $100 silver, and the thing can't even get to 20 because of what they've done. And I'm hoping that that's beginning to unravel, but we need more proof.
So this was all targeting off of that, or launching from that one reflection that you started with about no free press in America and no free markets. Any other sort of lifelong or career-long perspectives, words of wisdom that you can offer? Well,
the people I met are just fantastic in our efforts, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm a very lucky guy in that regard. And I've also, going through life and not being totally clueless about something that's, really important to America. And I don't know if we'll ever see the light of day because of what we just mentioned about the press, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. And like we just did with this Wall Street Journal fiasco, from my standpoint, my colleague Chris Powell was pleased with it because it got some of our issues out there. But, it's you fight the good fight.
And what about that fight? I mean, it has been it's been frustrating. It's been stymieing. It's been trying to make denial of the things you've been finding. Has the battle been worth it?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I want to stress the most. It's the journey that counts, and who knows? Something that happens. We don't do it to get our ego to be stroked. We want to win the day. We want this suppression and manipulation to end, but most people won't go there. They want cognitive dissonance rules, and they don't want to hear about it. They're making a fortune in the markets, the stock market. They don't want to know about it. Life's good, and it's going to stay that way till things blow up, which I think they will, and I think will happen because the gold cartel, again as I call them, will lose control of what they're doing. They're just going to be overpowered by some black swan, or call it a gray rhino, or whatever. And it's just they're going to lose control of it. The use of derivatives has gone nuclear, and it's just going to be too much. It'll be something that they didn't expect, and it just overpowers them.
Bill, is there anything else in reflecting back on things that you've learned through this process that is there anything that you feel you would do differently if you were to do it again, if you started this over again? Anything you would handle in a different manner?
Oh boy, it's a really good question. It's so difficult to go there because we've learned, along the way. And
well, let's start on the easier side of that same coin. If we just turn the coin over and say, is there one thing that comes to mind? You say, boy, I'm glad I did that. If there's one thing I did, or one thing I said, or one thing I didn't say, when I bit my tongue, or when.
Well, I'm glad we've made the effort to go all over the world, and we had 4 international conferences. and had them in South Africa, the Yukon, Washington, and London. And boy, they were all fantastic. And I mean, the people that were there, and it was just so much of a buzz and excitement. The last one in London, the Savoy Hotel, was right a month before the top of the gold market at 1900, and it was just electric. And it's the people I've met that have made it such a special experience. And if you were to say, well, what's the best thing? That's it. It's just a shame that the more people in the gold and silver industry itself are brain dead when it comes to this and just won't go there. They want their salary as executives, and they're not going to touch it. And for some of them have reason. I can understand it to some degree because they're dependent on the bullion banks who are rigging the market, and a lot of time in different governments they need permits. So it's difficult for some of them. But the big joke is the World Gold Council, because other industries, what you do is you join a World Gold Council and you have them do all the blame game stuff and get into the issue and say, well, geez, it's not me, it's the World Gold Council. But the World Gold Council is part of the problem. So what are you going to do? I mean, we're fighting City Hall everywhere we turn.
For people who are in this for the long haul, and even looking at it generationally, does your perspective stay the same? Do you still maintain that people who want to rely on something that can't be swept away, by other parties, should continue to rely on physical precious metals, gold and silver, as real money? Are you still as much a sound money enthusiast as ever?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, and this is the good thing about what God has done. It's the most important thing for people to understand. They are at in my opinion, artificially low prices compared to everything else, and this is going to blow up. The gold cartel is going to lose control, and especially silver. I think when silver takes out 21, it's on its way to 100, and it's not going to go up slowly. It's going to go like a rocket ship. It'll go like Bitcoin just did. And gold's going to do the same, and it's going to catch up to where its inflated price of 3,300, probably much higher. But doesn't do any good to just throw out numbers. But I am very confident that silver is going to explode, and I'm hoping that the open interest on the COMEX, which we don't need to get into, but it's been historically high for the past years, and the J.P. Morgan crowd has just stayed all over it and kept the price down here. But the reason I think it's going to occur, because they're going to lose control, this gold cartel, of the physical markets, and they're going to get overpowered. And when we take off next time, it's going to be, again, like a rocket ship. So I think probably gold and silver right now are as cheap as they've ever been in history relative to other assets.
Yeah, that's one of the things that came out in a recent talk that we had with Craig Hemke from TF Metals Report, is that not only are gold and silver priced extremely low in today's dollars, but today's dollars, as you mentioned, both in the near term, having been beaten down for 15 months or whatever it's been, the U.S. dollar, and then also looking longer term over the last 4 years since the foundation of the Federal Reserve have been beaten down to only pennies of what they used to be. And yet, even though that has necessarily driven up the apparent costs apparent value of stock markets, etc., and yet in the face of that, precious metals still appear a bargain even in those paltry dollars that we have left.
That's right, and now's the time for people to be paying attention. And I know from some of my friends, including my brother in the industry, people who can't get away fast enough when you bring the subject up. I'm hearing that from all over the place because of the stuff we just discussed. And yet now is the time to be, all over them.
Right, that's that contrarian signal from the lowest sentiment that people have seen in years among people, even those who have been long-term, advocates of real money and who know this backstory and who understand the manipulations, getting worn down and feeling discouraged, like there's nothing that can stop the manipulation and the distortions. One last question. We've had some comments on some of our videos claiming that a lot of this talk of suppression of price and so on is so much conspiracy theorism, and that people should just look at the simple capital flows. Just look at the cash flows. They say when cash is flowing into something, it's going to go up. When it's not, it's not. So it's that simple, and people use precious metals as a hedge, and right now that just means that they're not in favor. So What are your views of that approach, or do you feel like, no, there's just been too many smoking guns to take that simplistic approach anymore?
Well, I would say that to the person's face, what a bunch of hooey, if I've ever heard of anything in all my life. Conspiracies are the way of doing business among a lot of the bullion banks and so on. I mean, J.P. Morgan was fined 4 or 5 years ago $35 billion for rigging markets. I mean, how many, whether it's, and interest rates and LIBOR, and there's already lawsuits in the gold silver sector, in everything you can think of, about rigging markets. It's, this is where God has started, the gold antitrust. It's, it's supposed to be illegal. All these people get fined for what they do on Wall Street. Not one person has gone to jail, I don't believe. So I think it's anybody who talks like that has their head in the sand, and they certainly haven't looked at all the evidence that God has collected over nearly 2 decades now. And it's a big deal, and it's going to be a big deal when it blows up. And again, from my standpoint, this is just my own opinion, it's the most important thing to understand, because while it's very frustrating in the short term, it's the reason that both are going to explode, because these are, if you think of it like a pressure cooker, it's going to blow. And knowing this helps you to stay in the game versus, running for the hills when it's a time when people should be, most interested.
Well, Bill, if there's anything else that comes to mind as I've been kind of picking your brain and cajoling you into thinking back about kind of like the lessons learned in the long game, anything else that comes to mind that are some of your biggest takeaways from this decades-long crusade that you've been on?
Well, we've had, first of all, I want to compliment you for all you do in the sector and your way of doing business and the questions you ask. It's very impressive in my opinion. But I would like to say that we'd like to have one last conference, and that is a victory conference. And where, gold and silver have exploded, and we're not getting together to talk about the manipulation anymore, but to celebrate each other and the journey that we've had and have some fun, spend some money, have some laughs, and, as they say, one final conference, and, make it totally enjoyable.
Well, we'll look forward to that victory conference. We certainly, it was great getting to meet you in person at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium in Dallas, Texas. We enjoyed your fine barbecue down there, and we'd like to, you can pick the location for the victory conference. We'd love to see you there.
Well, and I hope you can make it, Dunnigan.
So Bill Murphy, co-founder of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, GATA.org, thanks as always for joining us with your words of wisdom here on Reluctant Preppers.
Okay, take care.